ask yourself, why is this on the Church of Cthulhu YouTube channel? Well, prepare yourself, dear cultists, because cutesy, plushy Cthulhu is just the beginning to the incoming tsunami of cozy horror that is coming. Not to mention all the cozy murder mystery books that already exist. And Scooby-Doo is definitely cozy horror, and he's been part of the Cthulhu mythos since the Mystery Incorporated 2010 episode, The Shrieking Madness. That, and I love being right, because everybody writing cozy fantasy or talking about it on YouTube has absolutely no idea what the genre is about or where it comes from. And since we're in the dead of winter as I record this, why don't you settle in by the fire in your snuggly blanket and bunny onesie or comfy pajamas, have a bowl of Captain Crunch or some hot cocoa, and listen as I spin the tale of the timeless origins of cozy fantasy. In recent years, the term cozy fantasy has gained popularity, describing a subgenre of fantasy that is low stakes, slice of life, and focused on warmth, comfort, and a sense of belonging. However, while this term may be new, the core concept of cozy fantasy is ancient. It has existed in various forms throughout human storytelling traditions, from classical fables to pastoral poetry, fairy tales, and early fantasy literature. In fact, its origins stretch back thousands of years, long before the phrase was ever coined. One of the earliest identifiable examples of cozy fantasy can be found in Aesop's fables, particularly the town mouse and the country mouse. This fable, dated to around 600 BCE, contrasts the dangers of urban life with the peace and simplicity of the countryside, reinforcing the idea that true happiness lies in a life free from stress and peril. But even earlier than Aesop, we can find cozy fantasy elements embedded in ancient literature and myth. Homer's Odyssey, written in the 8th century BCE, includes a fascinating example of cozy fantasy in the episode featuring the Phaeacians. Odysseus, weary from his arduous journey, finds himself in Scheria, a near-utopian island where the people live in harmony, enjoying music, feasts, and leisure. Though brief, this moment represents a classic cozy fantasy setting, an idyllic world untouched by hardship, where hospitality and comfort reign supreme. Similarly, Hesiod's Works and Days, circa 700 BCE, reflects on the virtues of a simple, rustic life in contrast to the struggles of urban existence. This theme of rural peace versus urban chaos is a recurring motif in later cozy fantasy stories. Even earlier than Hesiod, myths of the Golden Age, a utopian past where people lived in effortless abundance, appear in the traditions of various ancient cultures, including the Sumerians and Egyptians. Moving forward in time, we see cozy fantasy elements appear in the pastoral traditions of Greco-Roman poetry. The works of Theocritus, 3rd century BCE, and Virgil's Eclogues, 1st century BCE, celebrate idyllic countryside living, where shepherds sing, nature flourishes, and life is free from strife. Likewise, certain stories within 1001 Nights, the 18th, 14th century current era, such as the story of Prince Ahmed and the fairy Peri Banu, emphasize magical comfort and joy rather than adventure or conflict. In China, the Shanhai Jing, the classic of mountains and seas, 4th century BCE to the 2nd century CE, describes fantastical lands filled with peaceful, harmonious beings akin to later cozy fantasy worlds. During the medieval period, cozy fantasy found expression in folk tales and fairy tales across cultures. Stories such as Hans in Luck and The Fisherman and His Wife emphasize contentment over ambition, reinforcing the idea that a modest, peaceful life is preferable to one of power or wealth. The Renaissance and Enlightenment periods continued this trend, with pastoral literature and Arcadian settings appearing in works by Shakespeare, As You Like It, and later romantic poets like William Blake and William Wordsworth. And while the idea of a land of milk and honey is from the Bible, the concept developed during the medieval era of cocaine. Not cocaine, but cocaine. It was a mythical land of abundance, luxury, and leisure, where food was plentiful, work was unnecessary, and even the buildings could be made of edible materials. European folklore of the time described it as a paradise where roasted meats rained from the sky, rivers flowed with wine, and houses were built from cakes and pastries. This served as a fantasy of escape from the hardships of peasant life. Sounds a lot better than just being an orc who wants to retire from a life of adventure to open a cafe in the country. But hey, to each their own. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the cozy fantasy aesthetic took shape in children's literature. George MacDonald's The Prince and the Goblin, 1872, Beatrix Potter's Peter Rabbit stories, and Kenneth Grahame's The Wind in the Willows all depict gentle, enchanting worlds where the stakes remain personal rather than epic. My personal favorite is Alice in Wonderland, where you can still have daring adventures in a pastoral setting. J.R.R. Tolkien's depiction of the Shire in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings is arguably the most famous example of a cozy fantasy world, one where life is slow, full of food and friendship, and largely untouched by the outside world's conflicts. Other works, such as Anne of Green Gables, while not traditionally fantasy, share the cozy sensibility of warmth and belonging. The 1980s saw a massive surge in cozy fantasy cartoons with shows like The Smurfs, The Gummy Bears, The Adventures of Teddy Ruxpin, David the Gnome, My Little Pony, of course, Moomin, Ewoks, and the continuing works of Walt Disney, with its revitalization in the 1990s, could fill up their own full-length video essay. But by that marker, the most popular character in all of cozy fantasy would have to be Winnie the Pooh. That bear, paws down, sells the most merchandise of all the Disney characters, having generated approximately $80.3 billion in revenue, beating out even Mickey Mouse and almost doubling all the princesses combined. And we can't talk about cozy fantasy without mentioning Little Nemo in Slumberland, which helped shape the modern storytelling aspects of it, and the current king of cozy, the works of Studio Ghibli and Hayao Miyazaki. My Neighbor Totoro, Howl's Moving Castle, we all know, yeah. But there is another. There is. I have saved the best for last. One who stands triumphantly, leagues above the others. The coziest of them all. More than Pooh Bear. More than those pesky hobbitses. More than even Miyazaki himself. The one who has been bringing the cozy and the fantasy in one form or another for over 1,600 years. None other than that jolly fat man himself, Santa Claus, and all the iterations of Christmas joy and merriment that comes with him. Thus, while the term cozy fantasy may be modern, the concept has existed for at least 3,000 years, evolving through fables, mythology, pastoral poetry, folk tales, and fantasy literature. It has always served as an escapist balm, offering readers and listeners a vision of a world where harmony, simplicity, and comfort triumph over chaos and struggle. The desire for cozy fantasy is not a new phenomenon. It is a timeless part of the human imagination, stretching back to our earliest stories and continuing to resonate today. But this is the Church of Cthulhu, so I can't just leave you with a happy ending, like a house full of love and a mountain of presents beneath the tree on Christmas morning, because you know. And you know you know. So it's about to get a little dark, but it's something you need to hear. And afterwards, it will help the healing to begin. The renaming to and resurgence of cozy fantasy is fueled by nostalgia for a simpler time, often the joys of childhood. Through no fault of their own, millennials and now Gen Z have been robbed of that sense of safety and comfort in their lives. As a result, they long for it, endlessly pining away in YouTube video essays and social media rants for a childhood they never had or one that was ripped away by the harshness of growing up. Which is why they tend to give themselves tiny rewards and accolades for adulting. And I'm not attacking you. As Gen X, I totally get it. Because we were wrapped in that warm glow of 100 years of cozy fantasy in our media from the moment we were born. That's why there is so much nostalgia for everything 80s. We really did have it all. And we were unable to pass that world on to you. Because, well, obviously, greedy and uncaring boomers destroyed the economy and pulled the ladder of success up behind them, leaving the rest of us out in the harsh, uncaring cold. I weep, because as a father, I have failed to be able to provide that joy for my own children. So of course, we want none of this modern brutality. We long for the escape of the cozy and fantastical. But instead, we lash out, always blaming the other instead of embracing our own. You know what I do? I made a station on Pandora Radio that's only Christmas music. Because I had that perfect Norman Rockwell childhood. We were on track to have that utopian wonderland that we were promised as kids. We were building it ourselves. Then the boomers metaphorically took our toys away. It started in the late 70s, but really got rolling in the 90s. And by the end of the 2000s, the gig economy was fully underway, and our buying power was eroded down to nothing. So by all means, enjoy the cozy fantasy and all its associated flavors, and rest assured, I and many others are rebuilding that better tomorrow, and we will take back our paradisal birthright. And be sure to subscribe for more horror, occult, and Lovecraft madness. Until next time, Cthulhu Fatagan.